So someone went to the paint shop today. Look at this. Some more here. And even more here. So let's unpack this thing. So welcome to another video here at Back to Classics, and today we're going to discuss the 1979 Ducati 900 Replica, or Mike Hailwood Replica as it later became to know. We will cover a little bit of the history of this bike, and as you can see there has been some parts picked up at the paint shop, so we can start with the final build of this bike, and we will cover that as well in this video episode. So first, let's dive into the history about this model. Ducati back in 1978, well, they had the 900 Supersport in their lineup, and they were racing in endurance racing with the team of NCR back in those days. And well, they were quite successful in endurance racing. And they also decided to enter the Formula 1 races, especially on the Isle of Man. And what happened was that one of these bikes that were built at NCR was delivered to a racing team in the UK, which was called Sports Motorcycles, and was, well, the guy behind that was Steve Wynn. And he set up a team to compete on the Isle of Man. First in 1977, which was quite successful, but the main event came in 1978 when he got retired motorcycle driver and famous world champion winner Mike Hailwood to compete in the 1978 Isle of Man TT, the Formula 1 race over there. Well, there was some doubt about whether this retired guy, known for his victories in the years before that, was still able to compete on that level. But the bike proved to be very, very fast, and in fact, to many surprise, the guy actually won the 1978 Formula 1 race on the Isle of Man, which was a huge success for not only for the sports motorcycle team, but also for Ducati, as they were now finally had a major victory, especially in the UK, where it was a huge event to win the Isle of Man. And well, it was a huge success and came to be one of the big victories of the Ducati history. What they decided, in fact, after that victory, especially coming from the UK importer at the time, was to have a bike built, more of a sort of a tribute to that 1978 TT win. And what they actually did was they got this 900 Supersport they had from the lineup anyway, and created a bike that at least looked like the bike that Mike Hailwood drove on the Isle of Man in '78. And that became the first 900 replica in 1979. Mostly sold in the UK, again, because that was where much of the attention of that victory came. What they effectively did was they got a 900 Supersport and they fitted bodywork on it to be sort of the same shape as the Mike Hailwood racing bike, which was obviously a racing bike from start to finish. Not many parts are used on road bikes for these bikes. So what they did, the fuel tank, because the different shape of that fiberglass fuel tank that Mike Hailwood drove, that is different. In fact, they fitted the original 900 Supersport fuel tank underneath a cover that we can show you later. The whole of the fairing, of course, the complete fairing that was fitted. The seat is different than a 900 Supersport and was specifically made for this model. The idea behind this 1979 Hailwood bike was to build a few maybe a few hundred. In fact, at the end of the year, 200 were built. They all came with a certificate, and it was sort of meant as a limited edition, a limited run of bikes to be made in that year only. But it became such a success that they decided to make a regular production model out of it, and that became the 1980 model. What we have here is a very early 1979 model. So of all the Mike Hailwood replicas made until 1986, in fact, if you include the Miele, the last incarnation of the bevel drive twin, it was made until 1986. So this being the absolute first, it is the most valuable and most sought after of all the Mike Hailwood replicas. So let's dive deeper into the specifics on this bike. So here we have the completed engine of the 1979 900 Mike Hailwood replica. As you can see, it has been completely rebuilt and all finished, all to its complete and original specifications. And we're now going to pair this engine with its original frame and start the rebuild of the complete motorcycle, in fact. So we're now going to prepare the engine for the fitment of the frame. The frame is very tight around the engine, as it should be, of course, but in order to fit the frame, it makes sense to always remove these outer covers, kickstart lever and the carburetors, of course. So let's dive into that right now. And moving to the other side. So let's clear the workbench and we can move to the next step, which will be to get the frame around the engine. Workbenches are almost too tiny in this phase, as we have all the parts ready, which take up a lot of room. So here we have the parts that have been freshly painted and further prepared. The frame, all the thread, in all the brackets and lugs have been tapped, so that's all nice and clean. Make sure that the swing arm pin is fitting very well in both the frame and the swing arm. New homologation plate is fitted, new headstock bearings. So that's all been prepared, so this frame is good to go. What not many people know, but we actually, as well as on many other bikes, but this one as well, the frame and the other steel parts accompanied with the frame are in a slightly different color than the bodywork. Maybe you see hard on camera to get that on camera, but it's a slightly different, little lighter, more orangey color than the other parts. So we replicated that as well on this bike. So let's get going. So time to fit the frame, which is a two-man job, as it can be really tight around the engine, as you can see. So here we go. And that's all there is. So now the washers and the nuts, and we can tighten up the bolts. And if you look here, you can see what happens. Because when we tighten these bolts, the frame will set itself to the exact size of the engine, obviously. And that is what we need to do first, before we can fit the swinging arm. That also needs to be fitted between these two plates that are welded to the frame. So you see the engine being the size and the frame fitting towards around it, leaving no space between the two parts, of course. So we need some parts, some new parts. So let's get into our warehouse and get them. That's the way we like it. Perfect. Now we're going to fit this new grease nipple right here on the bottom. And now we're going to pump some grease in there. So, with this all lubricated, should even be smoother. Okay, that's done. So here, to fit the swing arm in its position, we're going to use these. These are fine thread M8 bolts. Many people use normal thread, and then you damage the frame, or the frame lug where the thread is here. So always make sure to use fine thread. It's M8 by 1. And now this nice end cap, and it's done. Moving to the other side. And now with the frame mounted, we can now also refit the outer covers, at least the alternator cover and the clutch cover on the other side, the kickstart lever. We're leaving this cover off, as we also need to mount the rear chain, obviously, and it needs to come off anyway. Same goes for the carburetors, which were rebuilt as part of the engine rebuild, but throttle cables need to be made and others stuff that needs to be adjusted. So we're going to fit the carburetors in a later stage. So moving to the alternator cover first. First the gasket, then we can fit the alternator. As you can see, for this rebuild, we're using the original knurled head M6 screws, which are very hard to find these days, but for special projects like these, we like to use them, as they are original. So, moving to the clutch cover again. First fitting the gasket. Let's put some grease on there to keep it in place. And what we also need is this little O-ring inside here. This being the main oil channel for the oil feed to the crankshaft. So this O-ring is there to prevent oil from coming out. As you saw, I don't fit the screws in one after another.
But first make sure that
the cover is fitted correctly and that the gasket is fitted in a good position.
and then I move on to
Set the screws at the correct level,
one after another and in a cross opposite direction.
so that it doesn't fit the cover in a crooked way. If you put on the load here and not there, then it can become crooked. So that's why I always do this. And then I go around checking that everything is set correctly. Forgot this, obviously. Okay, all done. So we're fitting the the front headlight support and instrument support. So let's fit that to the frame so we can mount other parts as well. Okay, and that's done as well. So, next job is to rebuild the rear shocks. Original Marzocchi rear shocks fitted to the 900 replica. And I'm now going to explain further what is needed to rebuild a pair of original shocks and to make them brand new again. So let's dive into the details here. So here we have all the parts laid out. As you can see, 2 complete shocks. And they have been prepared. As you can see, the outer housings have been newly painted in silver. The outer springs have been painted in wrinkle finish black. And we're now going to delve into the rebuild. For that we need a bunch of parts that we already found in our stock and are available in our online store. But more of that later. The first job in this case, as these are late 70s rear shocks, and they have a bit of a difficult thing when rebuilding these things. And these are the caps, the top caps that go on the top of the outer housing, and there's a seal inside. But as you can see, these were not meant to be serviced. They were meant by the factory to be replaced. But the factory does not offer replacement parts, so we're here with a bit of a problem. What they did is there's a seal inside this aluminium part. And how they did it is, if I show you the top, right here is a sort of steel washer on top, which has been tapped in place. Now these are you can open them, but then it's very hard to close them again because it's, like I said, it's meant to be fitted together only once in the factory, and thereafter it cannot be serviced. But obviously we do like to have a pair of fresh seals when rebuilding these. So we came up with a bit of a plan. I will now show you later on. It involves quite a lot of work, but at least it'll be serviceable afterward, and it'll contain a new seal. So let's get into that. So we move to the lathe, and we're now going to remove that steel ring holding the seals in place. And we're going to do that by taking a little bit of aluminium off right at the edge here, where it is tapped by the factory to hold the steel washer in place. So let's get going. So let's attempt to get it off. Success. So here are the top caps as they came apart. Both the washers removed and both the dust caps and seals removed. And now is the job to replace the seals. Now we have new seals in stock, and we have right here. So we can put that in, put the dust cap on it and put the washer back on it. But then again, we don't have the
you see it is slightly damaged around here when I removed the upper cap, because no one thought about servicing these parts.
So we have designed a solution for that, that instead of using that idea of tapping the edges over the steel washer, we're going to use a circlip. So that means that the inner part of this stop cap needs to be machined to get the seals a little bit further down and to get the circlip on top to hold the washer. So back to the lathe. So I first smoothed off this surface here. So we have a new measure to take from, and we're now going to have the pocket for the seal moved in a little bit deeper. So we're going to need a different tool for that.
Now I have to make sure that the size is exactly the same
In outer diameter for the new seal. Only the depth needs to be increased.
by about 15 millimeters from the edge that I just newly made.
So, set everything up. Let's have a go. So now we have made the chamber for the new seal, and we're now going to get the dust cap a little bit deeper as well. And got to measure up the depth to where it's supposed to go. And now I have to get a new zero for the diameter of the dust cap. So let's find that as well. Okay, so let's go again. There we have it. And now step 3, the outer diameter of the steel washer that goes up on top of the dust cap. Again, set everything up so we can have a go. Up to the final step. So now up is the final cut we need to do, and that is the chamber for the circlip. So again, everything is set up, so let's have a go. So with the machining done, we can now put it together with a new seal, the old dust cap, the old washer, and a new circlip. So let's get going. So with the machining done, we can now fit it together with a new seal, the original dust cap, the washer, and the circlip. There we go. So moving back to the parts, you can see I already pressed new eyelets in the housing, and we have the top caps covered. So now it's time to assemble the whole lot. So we're going to assemble the rear shock. We always check that the surface of this shaft is in good condition. If there's pitting in the hard chrome, it can cause leaks because it destroys the seal. Sometimes we need to replace them, in which case we cut them off, and we have a hard chrome shaft in stock, which we can then thread and make sure that it is fitted again to the top end of the rear shock. But in this case, that is not needed. The shaft is still in very good condition. So let's start with the assembly. First up is the stop rubber. Got a new one of those, so we'll fit that over there. And then next is the newly made top cap, as we showed you earlier. New seal in there, all set up with a circlip and good to go. So that should slide over here. And then there is a spring going over there, a cup holding the shims, and these are very delicate, so you need to be very careful with putting these on. This is a package of very thin washers that prevent the oil from flowing too easily through the piston. And as you can see here, there are little holes inside the piston, and the oil flow is limited through those. Now you need to make sure that that is absolutely set well. And then there's a toothed washer to hold the nut in place. Here we go. Again, checking that the washers are fitted correctly. They are. Now there's this tube in which the piston slides up and down. Piston ring needs to be compressed in order to fit them. There we go. Now we need to fit an O-ring on the top cap to prevent the oil coming out, of course. And we can take it to the next step. So we're now going to fill the rear shock with oil. We always use Motul shocks oil VI 400, of which 70 cc is needed in every shock. So let's get it going. And now we can close it up. So time to see if we have a good working of these, this rear shock, and it definitely is. Now the oil part of the shock is mostly considered with the rebound, and so it has to, you have to feel a lot of strength when you pull it out. Not so much when you put it in. That's mostly the spring that does that. That's the compression, but the rebound is done by the shock, as you can see here. So, up to the next job. So now we have assembled the shaft and the piston. Time to fill the shock with oil. And we always use this Motul shocks oil, factory line 400, which is a rather thick oil, the thickest we can get. And there needs to be a total of 70 cc in each of these shocks. You have to make sure that the tube fills with oil. And a little gets over to the side. So what I often do is get it in and out to get the oil in the right position. Otherwise it will just flow over right away, and then we can close it down. And then we can test this shock, and as you can see I have to put a lot of strength on getting the shaft out of the shock, which is a good sign, as that's what we want. It's the whole of the oil-filled shock absorber is actually meant for the spring, for the shock rebound. So it needs to go in quite easily, but out with a lot more force needed. The compression of the shock is mostly done with the spring, and the rebound is what is controlled by the body filled with oil. So these are ready for the next step. So next is the fitment of the spring. We have a newly painted spring holder, and then the spring itself, and then we have this top cap that needs to go there. But as you can see, the spring needs to be compressed in order to fit that top ring. So what we actually need for that is a pair of these. valve compressors, sorry, spring compressors. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Now you have to make sure that the shock is in the upper position and that the adjuster for the spring is in the lowest position, of course. Otherwise we have to compress the spring even further. Well, let's see if that is enough room to fit the top ring. There we go. And then we can get the tension off. There we have it. Functioning shocks. So, time for the finishing touch. Fitting these decals. Here we go. All finished. So next subject is dashboard and instruments. The bike came with a mix of original and non-original parts. The speedometer was not the correct one. It was a later version, as well as some of the dashboard lights that have been replaced by Panta items. So this is our chance to correct that. We found this mile-per-hour speedometer that was completely rebuilt to be completely new again. As you see, it's perfect and set to 0. The rev counter was the original. It also was rebuilt and is good to go as well. Then some minor bits to put it all together, and then the dashboard with the lights that were correct that came with it, and some new lights that we're going to fit there. Lights for the indicator and for the neutral warning light. So, well, let's get this going. Many people don't like these Nippon Denso instruments very much compared to the Veglia or Smith's instruments, but in fact they're technically very good, maybe even the best Ducati fitted back in the 1970s and early 80s. And over the years I gradually came to like these. I do like the look of it. Anyway, they're original for this bike and they're back on it. Next up is the electrical system for the restoration of this bike, and as you can see we have pre-fitted all the components to the frame. Newly built dashboard, and meanwhile also the ignition system, the original Bosch ignition system, is in place, as well as the fuse box and the regulator. So now we're going to move our attention to the wiring loom. Well, this is still the original wiring loom, and it's in a quite remarkable and good condition. A little bit dirty, but we can address that.
as well as some of these issues here. And like I said, it is in a remarkable and original condition, except for someone at some point lengthening the wires for the rear stop switch. As you can see here, with a blue-black wire going into a black one, and a red-black going into red. So we don't like that, but still very good shape and very well usable. So first we're going to repair the wiring loom before we fit it to the bike and connect all the different parts.
So we have fitted all the electrical components, ranging from the regulator, rear indicators, fuse box, ignition system, dashboard, switch and headlight, and we have hooked it all up with the original wiring loom, all set up, and well, it's a marvelous original condition. So next job is to see if everything works, in fact, and well, of course we have see that all the connectors are good and are fitted correctly, but we can now see if everything goes to plan by fitting a test battery and see if all works as it should. So let's get going. Okay, so first we're going to check if we have 12 volt on the ignition system when we turn the ignition switch. So it's now off, on, and you see the light going on, which means that we have 12 volt where it should be. On, off, so that we can fit again to its connector and leave that in place. So let's see if the headlight works. Put the ignition on, and there we have lights. Low beam, high beam. Low beam, high beam, and as well we can see the dashboard lights and instrument lighting working as well. So we're waiting for some final parts to come back from zinc plating in order to fully assemble this bit, but at least we can test whether the rear light is working or not by using our voltage seeker again. So, our voltage detector again, by putting this like this, and then when we switch on the light it should come on again, and it does. All works fine. Okay, and while we're here we're also going to test if the brake lights are working. So without the pressure switch attached we can test the connection by making it connect like this, and that makes the current go through the brake light. So for the rear stop switch it works exactly the same. We just connect them without this pressure switch mounted, but we can test it this way. And we have a rear brake light when I connect the two. There it goes. And the front brake light, which has its own switch obviously. See if that works as well. Yes, it does. So let's see if the neutral switch is functioning. Should be when we connect these two. Yes, the dashboard light is on and off and on and off. So let's test the indicators. And these are obviously not mounted yet, but we can test it with an old-fashioned light bulb that we have here. So first, test the right side. And we need a little bit of mass connection like that. And we need to make a ground connection before we can test this indicator here, as that is waiting for these parts as well. So let's see if it works. Indicating to the right. No, it doesn't. Yes, no. Ah, bad connection here. And off again. Let's see if we can get the left one to work. Yes, it does. So let's see if we have a horn. No, we don't. No, let's check why. So let's see if we have a connection or a bad horn, because it should come on if we push the switch, which it does. So I do get 12 volts here switched by the left-hand switch, which means that the connection is fine, but the horn itself is broken. Which is a pity, because it's the original Bosch horn, and these cannot be found easily anymore. So we have to get back on that one. And now the most important bit, let's see if we have an ignition spark. So see if we can test that by removing the spark plugs, fit these to the spark plug caps, and make sure that they are ground against the engine. Same for the rear. So, all the electrics are working, ignition, well, you saw the rest. So that concludes the electrical side of this project. Of course, there's more to be done with the indicators and with the rear light, but we can continue with that as we put more parts on the bike with bodywork, etc. For now, I think this will cover quite a lot in this video, and we will certainly go further with this rebuild, and come back with you with future videos about the final build and maybe even the first test ride. So be sure to follow us. For this time, thank you for watching. Toodle-dokie. See you next time.